Here we go. Nick Kalikas on the show. You know him from UFC On the Line. You know him from the Gambler's Perspective on UFC Fight Pass. MMAoddsbreaker.com, correct?
Correct.
What else, Nick? Aren't you on like 17 other shows?
Historically, I've been on several shows throughout, and I'll do some guest spots for sure. But yeah, you said it. I think UFC On the Line.
The main shows.
Main shows, correct.
Hey, so I want to get to big picture topics on how to be a good MMA bettor, a good bettor on UFC, so that you're winning more than you're losing. And I don't want to get too specific, but I do want your thoughts. This is going to come out on Monday. Cheeto Vera's an underdog, plus 130. Corey Sandhagen's like minus 150-ish. What do you think of that line, Nick?
You know what? Honestly, I think Sandhagen deserves to be the rightful favorite here in this spot. I've been making some cash off Vera as well on the other side of it. So this matchup for me is very intriguing. I think it's put together extremely well because of the stylistic matchup. Both these guys prefer to strike, of course. They both have a good ground game. So the way they match up together, I think it's going to be a fun fight. There's not going to be any dull moments, I think, as well. So, but I think what differentiates the two is Sandhagen does have a little bit more of offensive wrestling, a little bit more of, I think, a top game that he might implement here, try to get some takedowns, try to stall things out a little bit. So I think he's a little bit more well-rounded than Cheeto at this point, but it's so close, man. So I think the line's about right. Sandhagen should be a slight favorite.
So you're not only a guy that bets fights, but you set the lines for people that don't know, work at Circus Sportsbook, and you've been setting MMA odds for a long time. Cheeto just seems like one of those guys that is an underdog type of fighter because he fights with danger. He drops early rounds and then he relies on a finish. Is that right?
That is absolutely correct. And I mean, evidence of the last fight, rightly, with Dominic Cruz, his win over Dominic Cruz. He was trailing in that fight. But again, the later rounds are what kind of sets him apart from a lot of fighters. He's able to pick it up and have success in later rounds, and he was able to get the finish there. So yes, that is a very true fact about Cheeto Vera.
Okay, so just he's that guy that's plus money when you're on a win streak like he is. It's you could just go to the bank with it because he's getting plus money a lot of times. So for you, Nick, like I feel like before you were in the betting space, you were in the martial arts world, right? Like you're not a sports bettor that got into the UFC and MMA. You were very much a martial arts guy that got into the betting thing. Can you give us your martial arts background?
Sure. My dad was actually a black belt in Taekwondo since the time I was a toddler, like, 3, 4, 5. So he started training me at that age, like around 3 years old in the basement, so to speak. I ended up starting officially taking Taekwondo lessons around age 6, at the school, went to my dad's academy. A long story how I actually ended up taking official lessons because it was one of those things where my brother kind of started martial arts before me. He's 3 years older. And took it for about 6 months and then quit, which is very common, right? People start something up, they end up, doing it for a little while, they have quit. So my dad did not want me to participate. He was like, "You're going to quit just like your brother," or whatnot. So it was just, like I said, a fun, entertaining story and how we got there. But I started around 6 years old, and outside of the time I went to Costa Rica when I was around 23, 24, I mean, it was a big, huge part of my life. I competed all over the United States, internationally. I was world ranked, state championships. Our school was actually one of the only schools at that time to be ranked in the top 25 of all sport karate schools as well. So we had a lot of success in the sport karate world of things. We weren't an MMA school, so to speak, right? MMA was actually in its infancy back then too. So it's evolved quite a bit.
Yeah, there weren't MMA schools back then. There were always martial arts schools for the different disciplines, but there weren't MMA schools. How high did you get in the rankings? You were world ranked Taekwondo.
I was, I believe, ranked 7th in the world.
Wow.
In NASCAR.
Top 10.
I have my little, let me see here. 1 sec. I can actually pull the plaque over here. Well, it's over. I believe it's, I won the world championships in 1998, the Diamond Nationals, which was a huge tournament and probably the highlight of my career. But I competed in the Professional Karate Commission. I was on the USA team there for several years as well. So, I competed at a high level of sport karate, believe it or not. I mean, if you look at me now, you probably wouldn't assume so. But
now, when's the last? You don't practice martial arts now?
I don't, man. I mean, it's just, like I said, it was kind of a daily part of my life for so long. And just, when I kind of shifted over to the sportsbook world, so to speak, I really started focusing and trying to learn the trade, so to speak. And I just kind of got away from the martial arts training.
What do you think you still take from it, though? Because if you're a martial arts if you win a world championship in a martial art, was it Taekwondo world championship?
Sport karate. So it's like an open circuit. So you have Taekwondo guys, Kung Fu,
Okay.
So it's just,
but like, what do you take from that still?
I mean, a lot of hard work because it was funny. I switched over from traditional Taekwondo when I was a child. That's where we started, of course, and to sport karate when I was about 12, 13 years old, which is different. It's a different rule setting. And I had a lot of success in Taekwondo, winning a lot of tournaments. My instructor died. Again, another long story we could get into that whole topic, another time. But he passed away, so I had to kind of switch gears a little bit. And somebody showed me the open karate circuit, and I was like, man, that's intriguing. Because for Taekwondo fighters, we used to, kind of use our legs more than anything else. I mean, it was, you're heavy with your leg attacks more so than anything else. And in sport karate, it's more 50-50. So you're using your hands just as much as you're using your feet, right? So it was a different kind of style. And I was used to winning on the Taekwondo scene quite a bit. And I switched over and I started getting my butt kicked, man. The first 4 or 5 tournaments under this different thing, I had to adapt. I had to learn. And what I took from it is all the hard work I had to put in to be successful. Because after about 4 or 5 tournaments, I started getting the hang of things. And then I did start rolling off some wins. And then after that, I started having extreme success. But it was because of the discipline, because of the work I put in on the side myself. I mean, after I got my butt kicked in some of those tournaments, I'd go back to the gym by myself and I would work on things that I knew I needed to get better. So I think just that self-discipline and the motivation to get yourself better and to be the best you can be, I think is always going to be kind of part of me.
Yeah. So then why sports betting, or like why MMA betting? How did that enter?
We're going to go down so many rabbit holes.
Well, I mean, the quick version, version, basically. But like, was it when you went to Costa Rica?
Yeah, it was.
Okay.
I got a job offer offshore Costa Rica or whatnot. It was funny because we started with the success from sport karate that I had. I got an offer, and this was back, I mean, again, when the internet back in, the internet came around, 97? Yeah, 97, 98, I forget exactly what. So this was early 2000s. Like, okay. And there was a local sports talk radio show in Cleveland that actually launched a website, and they were hosting some shows on their website. So it wasn't on air on the radio, but they did have a streaming service. So they were ahead of the curve. Now look at us. We're all streaming all the time or whatnot, right? So they wanted to have a martial arts show. So they contacted, my brother was kind of a big time sports talk radio fan. So he called into the station and whatnot. And then after, he chimed in on a phone call or whatever about some sports stat. I think it was random basketball stat or whatnot. They started talking about fighting, and the producer of the show said, hey, I want to talk to you offline or whatnot. So our last name was kind of, in Ohio especially, our last name was kind of getting out there for martial arts. And so they inquired about us possibly wanting to do a show together and, putting it on air and whatnot. So we started the show. It was called Pro Karate Weekly. And at that time, MMA Weekly was out there. Of course, it was MMA Weekly Radio, Share Dog Radio, but we were like the third podcast. That's it. Like we were, so there was only a few of us. And then we ended up getting an email for a sponsorship proposal that came offshore. So that's kind of how it all started with. Okay. So we got an offshore sponsorship proposal for the show. They flew us out there, kind of wined us, dined us, so to speak. And before you knew it, they actually offered me a job to stay there. Yeah. When we kind of went and checked it out. So it all kind of came about that way. I wasn't expecting to kind of make a drastic career change, but I thought if I was ever going to do anything different in my life, it was time to do so. Yeah. So sports betting basically, or was it specific to MMA betting? Yes, it was specific to MMA betting. Yeah. And so were you setting lines right away? I was, and I was very inexperienced doing so, obviously, because I had no clue. So yeah, they just, they liked my knowledge. They knew I had knowledge about fighting, and and I could dissect fighters or whatnot too. They assumed, they were kind of give it a shot, right? So to speak. They wanted to, get boxing was out there. There was a lot of boxing lines, but MMA was UFC. There was only a couple fights being put out every once in a while. So I wasn't the first one that ever originated at UFC line. Right. I was the first to take it from just maybe a main event or the top 2 fights to actually putting a whole card on for odds and whatnot too. So at the beginning, it was rough, man. We got killed. I mean, the first year, especially, I got my butt handed to me because some bettors knew what they were doing. Yes, more so than I. They had the bankroll. They had some kind of inside information, meaning that they might have been closer to fight camps or whatnot. Because now that's changed quite a bit too. Yeah, the internet just growing as it is, all the research and everything we could do online. Back then, it was limited, man. We weren't able to get the footage. The game has changed quite a bit, so it was very difficult. Yeah, definitely got beat the first year. Things started getting better a year or two, and then by year 3, thankfully, everything got on track. We started profiting. Everything started kind of building, and I knew the job really well, and then we took it from there. Yeah, like when I worked at the Win Sportsbook, this is back in 2006-07. But the national finals rodeo is in Las Vegas, right? Yes. And then so they want to place bets on that. Like Cowboys come to town, they want to bet on the rodeo. So you need somebody in the sports book to can you set a line on,
these matchups for bull riders and stuff. And it's just like you're throwing darts at a wall a little bit, but really what you want is you want customers. Like, you want some casual customers to come in and bet on it. So that's what I can kind of see how they got you for that. Like,
Yeah,
let's get somebody
exactly.
who knows fighting and set a line and let's learn, let's figure it out.
It was marketing. Exactly. That's exactly
Right.
one of the new customers, to get the new customers in the door. They were thinking, oh, good. Like this sport could take off. And again, they were kind of ahead of the curve as well, right? Meaning that look what ended up happening.
Mm-hmm.
And that was pre-Ultimate Fighter. The timing was really good, to be honest with you, because the Ultimate Fighter came out not too long after and everything kind of took off with it. So yeah, it was, like I said, it was interesting. And I'm glad I got the opportunity, but it was not easy, man. I had to seriously go through some rough times. There's no question about it.
Were you do you view yourself as a sports bettor or a line maker, an odds maker?
A little bit of both these days, because I've been betting professionally now for so long, and it's been a big part of my income, my side income, so to speak. I've always, tried to have my mainstream or my main income come from being an odds maker or consultant, so to speak. But again, the extra income I've been able to make through the years on the side betting fights has been pretty good. So, I mean, I am a hybrid of both, if that makes sense. So I am an odds maker, but I am also a pro bettor.
Yeah. What is an early lesson that you learned that you do not make anymore as somebody who bets on MMA and the UFC?
Wow. You know what? You're always making silly mistakes, even at this level.
Even now
you're making, big part of it is obviously discipline, try to stay away, chasing back money sometimes where you shouldn't. I mean, I still make some of the common mistakes that you tell people not to do. It depends. You want to have a little bit of action on a card or whatnot. So maybe you force a bet in here or there. Being disciplined is the most important thing. You got to just pick your spots, stay with those, win or lose, maybe try not to chase back a bet or two. And then for me personally, I've been pretty good about that. So I'm just saying I'm human. So sometimes you got to fall into your trap or whatnot. But for me personally, it's betting my own team somewhat outside of MMA and outside of the UFC or whatever.
Right.
Like I'm a big Bengals fan, as you know. I'm a big Duke Blue Devils fan. So for those types of things, I'm a little bit of a degen, meaning I'll throw a little bit of cash on my teams almost every time they play if I get to watch them or not. So that's not a good strategy on making extra money on the side. So again, it depends on your bankroll and you're having some fun or whatnot. So that's, I think my flaw would be just, historically losing a little bit of extra cash on my own teams.
Betting emotionally towards it. Yeah. Do you ever bet emotionally on UFC fighters that you like, that
No. No, that hasn't really been an issue.
In that world, you stay pretty disciplined.
Yeah, I do. I have. Yeah. I've stayed pretty disciplined, yeah. I mean, I'm always going to be rooting and picking for, like, especially Ohio guys. I'm from Ohio. So Stipe's out there, the Just guys and stuff like that. I mean, automatic. Like, anytime they fight, I'm going to be rooting for them. I want them to, do the best they possibly can for sure. So I've got to kind of have that hometown bias, so to speak. And all the traditional guys and all the fighters that have come out of Ohio. I mean, you're talking about the Mark Coleman's. I mean, historically, it's been – Rich Franklin's out there. It's been a hotbed for UFC and MMA fighters. So, that would be the bias, if anything. But as far as setting lines or whatnot, I try to stay as neutral as I can.
Now, when it comes to main events, obviously they get all of the attention. I've always told people, if we have 12 fights on a card and 11 fights are great and then the main event sucks, we walk out of the building and we're like, well, that wasn't any fun. Like, that wasn't good. And if in reverse, if we have 11 clunkers and the main event rules, we'll just be like, what a night. That was amazing. For you, from a betting standpoint, there's more attention. There's more analysis. There's more knowledge on both sides of main event matchups. Do you find yourself betting main events less because there's less of an edge?
That's a good question. I guess I've never really thought about it too much, but that is very true. I mean, I do, like, more times than not, I'm going to probably stay away from a main event, depending on the situation or what it is. But yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. And I mean, in some cases, though, there is a lot more public money that gets bet into a main event.
Sure.
So you can take advantage on that end. But historically speaking, if I have to pick my spots, it's not always the main event that gets mixed into, a bet or whatnot. So I think that's accurate.
Like, it's always like pick your spots, where you as an MMA expert would know more about the first prelim of the night than casual bettors, and you can pick your spot there.
Yes. And I have more success in those type of areas, I think, as well, because those are the fights that, the prelims, the people that are flying under the radar, making their debuts, so to speak, those are the fights that get lined a little bit off, and people are not as comfortable setting those type of lines. So when there's lines floating around out there and I generate my line and I look down and I see a big difference in it, of course I'm going to pounce on it. But yeah, I definitely love that. Even like the contender series type of fights, right?
Yes.
And those type of situations, I love digging into those fights because there's just so much. I mean, it's hard to get the footage and it's hard to get some information on those guys, but if you can do it, you have a big advantage. So I love those spots.
How do you describe trying to set a line, and do you set lines where you almost charge a tax on a fighter that's more known? Let's say a fighter coming off the contender series, right? They get more promotion. They were seen by more fans versus a guy making his debut. Like, do you ever say this line should be closer, but this guy is known more, so we're going to shade the line that way?
100%. I've done that historically so often. I mean, every time you have to factor in the public opinion, and it's kind of a guessing game, which sounds crazy to people, but it is. So again, I'll come up with my line, and then if the popularity or the hype around a fighter, I actually will add tax, like you said, to it a little bit. So if my true line is minus 170, I might throw it up at minus 210. Because I know, again, and it's kind of a little bit of a guessing game and some adjustments get made with the public because I know they're going to bet that side. So why am I going to give them minus 170 when they're going to come in and lay minus 210?
Right.
So, and I know that's going to happen. So oftentimes I'm right about that. And I said it's the right way. But you know what bites you sometimes is if you overgauge it a little bit, you're thinking, okay, the hype is going to be on this fighter. My line's 170. I open it minus 210. And then the first few bets come in are on the dog. You're like, oh, man, I should have stuck to my guns. I knew, you know what I mean? So you see what
so you get
seeing.
some limit bettors coming in, some sharps coming in on the dog because they spy it.
And of course, then you adjust and you're like, man, they agree with me. They're on my side, of course, which seems right. And you understand why. But then you have to make those adjustments to try to get money back the other way to try to put yourself in a better spot. So more times than not, though, I'm ahead of it and we're going the right way with it. But at times, putting that extra like hype or whatever into the equation does come back and bite you.
In the UFC space, you're respected as a lines maker. Do you ever put out lines knowing that they're going to get mimicked and you can I know what you're saying. Maneuver your bets, right?
I should do ever do that, often, man. No.
Do you ever do that?
I can't do that because
is that against gaming commission rules and stuff?
No, well, I mean, I'm sure there's something there, right? There's got to be something there. I don't know, but I've never no, I want to do the best I can for, historically every spot I've worked at, I've always tried to do my best. And I have pride in setting my lines too. So I'm not going to, I want something to go out there that came from my desk to actually be okay. Now it's going to move. People are going to bet into it. Some of my lines, like the lines that you see out there, are going to float a couple hundred cents, maybe, you know what I mean? You could be that far off. But overall, I do take pride in my lines and I try to be as accurate as I can. And I've always done that. So I haven't manipulated the market, so to speak. Now, these days, there's so many lines that are coming out there. People are jumping the gun, and it's a lot of it's marketing, right? So the limits might be a little bit smaller, but they're getting these fights out there as quick as possible. So they get these early bettors coming in and signing up at their places or whatnot, and opening accounts just to get some of the early lines in there. So it's a good marketing strategy for a lot of these books. But there's so many lines floating around that now, from time to time, I will if anything. Like, say there's a line, again, we'll use minus 170, for example, that's floating around. And I do think it could be minus 190. I might go minus 175 to go to the top of the market. You know what I mean? Maybe just edge the top of the market. So I'm not basically manipulating the market, so to speak. But at the same time, I know if I'm going to bet, if I think that line should be way higher and the market's showing minus 170, I might put it up at minus 175 because I want to get down too, right? Meaning I'm not going to, why should I lay 190? But it does happen, meaning that I do set the line, even if there's lines floating around. And my line might be a little bit different on a guy that I like. I open it up higher than the market is, right? And then the market catches up to us. I'll make my adjustment and go a little bit higher to catch up to us again. Before you know it, I did ruin my own number, so to speak. So for me, I'm not selfish in that regard. I mean, I do look out for the companies that I work for, and I try to do the best I can. But if there's a possibility where I don't have to go crazy and set the market off a different, you know what I mean, too ridiculous, then I will just shade a little bit, if that makes sense.
If somebody comes up to you and say, I want to start betting on UFC, but I'm pretty new, I'm pretty casual at it. What do you tell them if they're like, I need some advice, not like specific picks, advice other than like discipline and, knowing to sit one out. But is there some simple advice you can give? I
mean, I think to start off, just start watching the fights and become a fan. First of all, I mean, it's a shameless plug, but UFC Fight Pass these days is a must with all the footage out there.
Yeah.
You could use it as such a good tool outside of the shows and everything that goes on. Because a lot of these fighters that are coming in from LFA, from Cage Warriors, from some of these smaller organizations are feeding into the UFC. the footage is available out there on UFC Fight Pass. So sign up to a place like Fight Pass, start really digging into the footage, watching the fights from a week to week basis. Then maybe pick your spot. Start off betting. Like when I first started betting, I was betting like $15-25 a fight. I was betting really small. And then once you start seeing some success or whatnot, you can kind of, up the ante, sort of
figure out your patterns a little bit. Yeah.
So at the beginning, I think that's the best way to handicap fights, honestly. Now, with these days, you have a lot of analytics that come into play. You can kind of use those to your benefit. But I think the basic strategy, go out there, study the film, try to see if you can get an edge of the fight, maybe bet $5-10 on it for fun, see how it plays out. And then you start building some traction. You start getting some confidence. Your eye starts sharpening up on film study. You start seeing different things that you normally wouldn't. And everything kind of comes together. Yeah. You'll start making some profits. And then you can kind of increase your bankroll if that's the case. Or a lot of people out there that don't have a bankroll, you could have somebody stake you. You could have somebody that's kind of your backer, so to speak. It supplies a bankroll for you, and you get a cut of the action, so you can make some bigger bets. I mean, a lot of people are doing it that way too.
Are they really? Yeah.
Yes.
People that are sharp and they just need more capital.
Exactly. I mean, there's a lot of sharp bettors. Even you see it. I mean, social media these days, there's quite a bit. There's a lot of people that are knowledgeable across all sports, right? There's a lot more losers, obviously, and a lot of bad advice, unfortunately, is given. But there's still enough talent out there that a lot of these guys that are on the smaller scale as far as betting goes, there's some sharp opinions. So when they do end up, coming across somebody that has a bigger bankroll and the partnership makes sense, I mean, we do see that happening, and it's a very successful venture more times than not.
Is MMA an easier sport to beat the books on than other sports?
I think so. I think you can. I mean, if you do your homework, like I said, on a year-to-year basis, I think you're going to grind out some profits. And I do believe, I mean, just with all the variants, it's tough like everything else. But at the same time, if you do your homework, you're going to have an edge. And again, I'm an odds maker, and I'm telling you, you're going to have an edge, and you can win, betting in MMA more so than I think. NFL is so hard, man. I mean, you hear it like pro bettors say it all the time. It's just so difficult. So I think MMA is still one of those sports that, again, it's kind of more unique. I think the smaller sports, the people maybe aren't paying attention to some of the, even a lot of people are now, golf is not a small sport, but a lot of people dig into golf, so to speak, right? You can go that route, right? With it and just kind of dig into
matchups.
Yes, or a prop bet or stuff like that. Just maybe dig into some of those weaker type of areas, and you can exploit them. So I think MMA like that. It's outside of NBA basketball. If you're betting NBA, good luck to you, man. You see all the runs and everything that goes on. I mean, I help book NBA on a nightly basis too, so I see it. I mean, team goes up by 20, the other team comes back and ends up winning by 10. You see that craziness all the time. But in MMA, it's a little bit more stable. The only thing that I do get upset about, and because you're in my chats too, is the judges, dude. The judges just frustrate me. That's the hardest part about betting MMA. You have to have some thick skin because, I mean, every week we seem to see it, like some head-scratching decisions where you see 30-27 one way and 29-28 the other way. Come on, man. There's no consistency. So that's the thing. The hardest part for me about betting MMA has been the judges. I mean, I've been burned so many times. And now they do come back to you sometimes, meaning that you're going to get lucky and get a decision that shouldn't have went your way. But for me, it seems like more times than not, I mean, it works against you than it does for you. But as they say, it's supposed to even out. Yeah,
it's one of those things where you're going to remember the negatives more than the positives, like in life and in betting and whatever. You're going to remember your bad beats more than your lucky wins. But for 100%. You, I do think that you've been screwed by the judges more often than not. Like when I kind of see it.
Yeah.
I was just going to say MMA potentially is more beatable than the NFL and NBA in those sports because it's 1v1, right? It's 1-on-1. There's not 11-on-11, 5-on-5. Like that's a lot of moving parts and a lot of referees involved. But you bring up a good point. It's not 1-on-1 when there's 3 judges. Now all of a sudden it's 5 people that are determining the outcome of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we see it all the time. The media scoring a certain way. All of us, the fans on Twitter scoring a certain way. Then the judges have it a different way. So again, I understand, the aspect of things where judges have a different point of view and, they're trying to stick with their criteria, but still, man, a lot of head scratching decisions. And let me just say this. I don't think it's corrupt. I don't think the sport is like, I don't think there's any shady, funny business going on. I don't, I don't think these judges are doing this on purpose because they got action on it. I don't think there's anything. I just think they're just not on the same page.
Yeah, they're seeing what they're seeing. I know.
Yeah, it's just it's crazy, So I don't know. Hopefully, I don't think it'll get better because this isn't just a new thing, man. This has been going on for years and people don't realize it. So I
It's
haven't
tough
seen it
to
get better.
draw the line somewhere where it's just like, okay, use more judges. And
Something.
then, all right, then, you know, we'll see.
Yeah.
What would you say to somebody who is betting MMA, UFC consistently, and they want to take the next step and be more of a serious bettor, right? Because there's a lot of people out there and they're just like, man, I would just love if I could do this professionally or make a lot more money. How do you go to take the next step?
I think, again, starting off with your bankroll management. So you set aside a certain amount of money that, you start from there and then try to build that bankroll. Just try to be disciplined, stick to picking your spots and stick to your unit sizing accordingly. And then I think from there, it kind of builds up. Or like I said, if you are looking for some sports betting partnerships on social media these days, there's people out there. I mean, it's not hard to find that if you do have some success and you want to take things to a bigger level. I think, like I said, getting somebody to possibly bankroll you. We see in poker all the time now too, right? A lot of people are getting bankrolled.
Yeah, they've been doing that for years, bankrolled into tournaments and stuff.
Yep. So I think that's the way to possibly get.
How do you do that on social media? You put out a tweet and you say, these are my results, and then somebody will.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people could do that. It's, again, social media is such a broad area or whatnot. Yeah. But you see the MMA gambling space, there's a lot of people out there. So yeah, I mean, you put out
start making connections, basically.
Start making connections, and then slide into some people's DMs here and there, and just kind of feel things out. Look, you don't get anywhere by staying quiet. You have to go after what you want. And that includes maybe possibly, again, if you're a small bettor and you want to step things up a little bit, that includes going after possibly a larger bankroll with somebody partnering up with them. You know what I mean? So you have to go after things. That's one thing that I've taken throughout this whole process, throughout my career and whatnot. Like, the people that stay quiet and don't go after things are not going to get very far, right? So I mean, sometimes it's tough because I'm a shy person too, man. It's so sometimes I don't want to stick my neck out there or something, but at the same time, I think that's the way to go. So you gotta get over that shyness. You gotta have a little bit of grit and determination. Try to go after things. So even in that and crazy world in the sports betting field, I think that works that way too.
And bet on yourself. I mean, not to be, not to use a pun, but for people that don't know, you started working on the line. We were flying you out from Ohio each week. You moved out to Las Vegas. You got yourself a job making odds here in Las Vegas. And I would say things have gone well for you the past 4 or 5 years, right?
Yeah, it's awesome. I mean, honestly, working for a company like the UFC, that's something from day one where I was setting odds. I thought maybe down the road, it'd be awesome if I could be a betting analyst for the UFC. So this is something that I've been wanting to do for a long time. And I'm glad that betting got to the, mainstream that it is today, because it's opened up a lot of doors and opportunities. So yeah, working for the UFC and being able to do what I do, I am very fortunate.
Are over-unders easier? Because I can't bet on UFC. It's against policy, and I don't want to even mess with it through back channels because I think it would affect how I call fights. But when I do look at lines and when I look at over-unders, I think in my head that I could usually call over-unders a lot more frequently than I can predict who wins. There's so many fights that are tough to figure out, and you could talk yourself into a plus 300 underdog winning by knockout and that sort of thing. But when I see a 1.5, I go, that's probably an over 1.5, or that's probably an under 1.5. And a lot of 2.5s, I'm like, this is definitely going 3 rounds. So how do you view that?
Yeah, I think totals, as the sport kind of grows and as the odds get put out there and everything kind of sharpens up a little bit, I think that is probably still the weakest area right now. So the money lines, of course, we see a lot of action and they float all around, but I still think it's harder for people to gauge totals right now.
It's harder for odds makers
to gauge. Yes. I think now we're seeing more analytical data come into play here too, and people actually have systems in place where they're trying to bet into the totals because they think the totals are weak out there, right? So there is, I think, some variance and some ability to actually beat these numbers, like you said, and you see the totals kind of floating 50, 60 cents on fight day or whatnot too sometimes. So yes, I think if you pick your spots, because those markets are not bet into, like the money lines, you're going to have way more action on the straight sides of the money lines than you are on totals. I mean, I see it, on a daily basis where one max bet could definitely lopside our total and you're stuck with, needing the over or under at the sports book than it is. Like you're not getting as even money there. So they're bet into a lot less, but they're beatable. I do think so. I think, like I said, people struggle with kind of setting the lines. You see something from 2.5 go to 1.5 right away as well, because, the action demands it. So yes, you can pick your spots that I think be successful in betting totals. And again, if you're an analytics type of guy, I think running, some different data, some different systems or whatnot, you might have an edge.
I mean, it's a 5-minute window, right? That they're changing. If it goes from 2.5 to 1.5, that's 5 minutes.
That's all.
So they can't really go like 2.2 rounds, right? They can't, I mean, I guess for big fights, they can kind of really get specific on it, but also on the over unders. And this goes bigger picture with all MMA betting, value versus picking winners. There's a lot of what, you would probably refer to as squares. I know Yanni would refer to as squares. It's not about picking the winner. It's about the value of the line. How do you start figuring that out? Because if I see something at minus 200 and I'm just like, this, I think is definitely going to happen, but you're saying it should be minus 170 and I make a bad bet at minus 200, but I win that bet, right? How do you explain that?
I mean,
or how do you start figuring it out, right? Because it's tough to like be like, oh, that's an overvalued or that's undervalued.
It comes with, you get a natural kind of feel, you know what I mean?
It just takes reps.
Yeah, it takes a little bit. Yeah, it takes reps. I mean, right away, if I look at a line, I can it's like, holy cow, but it's, again, easier to point somebody else's line out. Like everybody has a different opinion. So if I set a line, I think another odds maker out there could be looking at it, oh, that's too high, that's too low. Automatically, right away, they're going to think you're going to have an opinion if it's too high or too low, one way or the other, right? And the same thing for me. If I see a line, automatically, I'm like, ooh, that's not right. That should be lower. That should be higher. Yeah. So I think like with the experience, with time, you're going to be able to kind of spot those lines. But again, making your own numbers, it kind of coming up, regardless of how you get to it. I mean, a lot of people probably, have different ways of kind of approaching how they get their money line numbers. But if you have your money line number like minus 150, and then you're seeing the market at minus 200, there was going to be some value there for you on the dog then. So you just kind of start taking your number that you kind of generate. Again, there's a lot of different ways you can do it. I think the basic strategy, again, I think is going into studying film a little bit and then equating what you think that line should be yourself and then comparing it to the market and then making a bet. I think that is the difference. When you're seeing a discrepancy in the line in your line, and you have to trust yourself more so than anything else too. That's one thing. A lot of people, and I even get thrown off the track sometimes when I'm on a rowboat by myself and I see like if I like this dog fighter and everybody else on the planet is coming in on the other side, including some sharps that I respect their opinions, right? And I'm thinking, man, maybe I'm wrong here. And then by the end of the day, more times I'm like, man, I should have stuck to my guns. Maybe I'll make a smaller bet than I normally would have, right? Because I'm like, man, there's so many sharp opinions on the other side going against me here. I'm not going to go crazy and make this a 4-unit bet. I'm going to make it a 2-unit bet instead. And then before you know it, stick to your guns, man. I'm telling you, there's a lot of sharp people out there, a lot of sharp opinions. But if you're doing your homework, trusting yourself more than anybody, and it is going to pay dividends. I know that's hard to believe or whatnot, but trust yourself, trust the process, because you know what you just looked at. You know what the work that you put in, and it will come together for you. I guarantee it. If you do things right and put the work in, it's going to end up working out for you.
Nice. Last question. Do you like to bet when the lines come out, or do you like to bet closest to the fight?
Previously, a long time ago, I used to bet when the lines came out too as well. I mean, here's the thing though. It depends on the situation, because I used to originate and generate the majority of lines that were coming off, from offshore, that were hitting the sportsbook markets, even in Vegas, were coming from my desk. Everybody was going to, after the lines were released, everybody just kind of copies and pastes and shades a little bit. So in that case, I couldn't really bet the opening line because it was coming from my desk, right? So I would wait, and then people would bet into the line. And then once the line got a certain point early on, I would say, okay, that's ridiculous. They already bet it up 50 cents. I'm going to go on the dog here, right? So I would, if they bet up the favorite, then I would pounce and bet the dog because I thought there was some value there. And more times than not, the line did come back down and you got a good price. So that's the early betting that I used to do here. Now, for me, I bet more towards weigh-ins or even on fight day. If I could find a number that I know is going to fly, I'll get it on as early as I possibly can.
Right.
But to get the bigger limits, to get the bigger action, a lot of times you're going to have to wait. You're going to have to wait to fight day. Some of these sports books, even some of the reputable books, are not going to take a lot of action early on. So you almost have to wait to fight day so you can maximize your betting units and your size. And believe it or not, on fight day, there's still value to be had. It's a misconception. Like, again, on an NFL Sunday, if you're betting into NFL Sunday, those markets, there's some sharps that are still betting into those, but they're pretty stable at that time. So if you're betting into the NFL,
they're not moving a line off of 6.5 at 9:30 on a Sunday morning.
Those lines are pretty sharp at that point.
Yeah,
and so it's harder to kind of beat those.
But
numbers.
MMA, there's variance on the day of the fight.
There is, man, because
that's when the attention gets shifts toward UFC.
It gets, so you're getting some public money in there, and at the same time, you have all these bigger bettors that are waiting for those limits to get maxed, and then they're saying, okay, now I can get 30,000 down, I can get 10,000 down before I can get 1,000 down. So they're waiting, and the lines are sitting there all week long, and they're probably drilling, thinking, I hope that line doesn't move. I hope that. I mean, that's the game you have to sort of play sometimes.
Yeah.
You're hoping that your line doesn't get ruined. So these days, I wait more towards weigh-ins and more towards like fight day. That's the majority of my action. Or like I said, if I'm doing a show or whatnot, I'll have a little bit of my action, possibly pre-shows into whatever I'm going to bet, and then I'll put more money. Hopefully, if the line gets
when
better,
the limits get higher. Yeah.
What's
that most amount of money you placed on a fight?
Oh man. I mean, again, with betting partnerships, so that's kind of not even fair to say.
Yeah.
But I mean, just roundabout figures. I mean, we've probably had with partnerships a house at stake on a weekend.
A house,
maybe not on one
several $100,000
on one weekend. That's been
for a fight card. For a
fight card, not one specific fight. But yeah,
have you ever gone to 50,000 on a single fight?
Yes, yeah. Not, I mean, again, not myself.
Right. With partnerships, right?
Yeah, exactly, stuff like that. So yeah, I have, yeah. Yeah, and that's a sweat, man.
Bet the house, baby. Bet the house. There's new meaning to bet the house.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy because, I mean, again, I just talked about that. I'm not trying to brag. You're just, so.
I know.
I don't roll like that. Like I said, I have partnerships with whatnot. I'm not saying that I'm not claiming to be, some kind of monster bettor out there or whatnot. But I mean, from starting from $25 to getting to the point where I'm now, I mean, it's a big difference.
It is a big difference. What a journey it's been. Nick, I'll have you back on the show more in the future because people want to know how to bet like a pro. And you're a pro, odds maker, and a bettor. Show everyone your T-shirt you were showing me. UFC. This is a T-shirt that Nick made. UFC on the line. We got to get some on the line merch.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll get some on the line merch. I'll throw that up the chain, and we'll get all the degenerates out there that love watching us, and specifically you and Yanni, make your picks for each betting card, and also the gambler's perspective here on UFC Fight Pass. Thanks a bunch, Nick.
No problem. It was fun, man. Love doing this stuff. So thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching Fitz Nation on the UFC Fight Pass YouTube channel. My bosses would love it if you hit that UFC Fight Pass logo and subscribe to the channel. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.